Welcome back, everybody, to another deep dive. And today we're taking a look at all of the English fluency tips and techniques that you sent us. And I gotta say, there's one that stood out to me right away.
Ooh,
Yeah, this whole idea that listening comprehension actually is kind of the secret weapon for speaking more fluently.
yeah. That's something that I think a lot of people miss.
Really is. So let's talk about this source material a little bit. What is it that makes it so special and so different?
Well, the material's really interesting because it's set up like this mini lesson in this podcast format where you have this natural conversation and then you've got some vocabulary explanation, you've got some questions to kind of get you thinking and speaking out loud, and then you even have a section on something called shadowing.
Shadowing. I like that. Okay. One thing I've always found so fascinating are idioms, those like expressions that, really can kind of make or break, if you're trying to sound natural. And the source material focuses in on this expression, get away with why this one, what's the thinking here?
Well, idioms are just crucial if you really want to sound natural and fluent in any language, right? They add that color and authenticity to your speech. And so this particular example, get away with, it's a great way to really illustrate how to incorporate those into your everyday conversations.
Oh, that's right. You could say something like, he got away with speeding, or she got away with telling a little white lie.
Exactly. And those little nuances are what help you sound less like you're reading from a textbook and more like a natural speaker.
It's like the spice.
hmm
Okay, so tell me about this listen and answer section. What's so effective about that?
Well, it all boils down to active listening. Instead of just kind of passively absorbing the words, this section forces you to really engage with the material, answer questions, extract meaning, and that active engagement, it actually primes your brain for language production.
It makes you work for it.
Yeah.
Interesting. Okay, then there's this shadowing technique. Now, I have to admit, the name makes me think of like, following someone around in a trench coat, but I'm guessing it's not quite that literal.
Not quite. No shadowing involves immediately repeating sentences after the speaker mimicking their pronunciation and tone. And it may sound simple, but it can be really powerful.
Why is that? I've always been a little skeptical of this technique.
Well, think of it like practicing a musical instrument. The more you play a particular piece, the more fluid and effortless your movements become. And shadowing works in a similar way. It helps you build up this muscle memory for pronunciation so the sounds become more automatic. And it also helps you internalize the natural rhythm and intonation of English, which is crucial for sounding fluent and confident.
So it's like you're training your mouth and your ear to work together as a team.
Exactly. And here's where it gets even more interesting. Shadowing can actually boost your confidence by letting you, quote unquote, borrow fluency from a model speaker.
Borrow fluency. I like that. That's like a shortcut.
Yeah, it's like a fluency hack.
I really like how the source has this call to action at the end where they actually challenge listeners to use get away with in a real conversation.
Yeah, that's a great point. It's not just about learning the words in isolation. It's about actually putting them into practice.
Putting them to work.
Exactly. And that ties into those principles of spaced repetition and active recall, which are really, really effective for language acquisition.
Oh, so you're talking about taking that knowledge out of the textbook and bringing it into your everyday life.
Yeah, making it real.
You're not just memorizing words, you're actually making them a part of your active vocabulary.
Exactly. And that's where true fluency lies, in being able to use the language spontaneously and effortlessly in real-life situations.
I'm starting to see why you're so excited about this. It's not just another, boring language lesson. It's about making it engaging, interactive, applicable.
Yeah, it really is. And it takes these, kind of these proven techniques like active listening, shadowing, spaced repetition, and it combines them in a way that actually encourages learners to put their knowledge into action. It's a really great example of how language learning can be both fun and effective.
Yeah, I've always struggled with, how to find that sweet spot between, making it stick, but also, keeping it interesting.
Yeah.
This seems like it's a game changer, and it all comes back to this idea that listening is the foundation for speaking. I think a lot of people probably miss that, but we are going to dive deeper into that connection in just a bit. You mentioned spaced repetition earlier. Can you break that down a little bit more for me? I know it's a really popular technique, but I'm not exactly sure how it all works.
Yeah, it's actually a pretty simple concept, but it's really powerful. The basic idea is that you review information at increasing intervals. So instead of cramming everything all at once and then forgetting it, you space out those review sessions over time.
So how does that help you remember things better?
Well, each time you go back and you revisit that information, you're forcing your brain to actually retrieve it from memory. And that act of retrieval, it actually strengthens those neural pathways associated with the information. It's kind of like exercising a muscle. The more you use it, the stronger it gets.
That's interesting. So, are there certain intervals that are better than others? Like, is there a specific schedule that you should follow when you're reviewing material?
There are a few different systems that people use, but one really popular approach is called the Lightner system, and it basically involves flashcards, and you space out the reviews based on how well you remember each card. So if you get a card right, you move it to a deck with longer intervals, and if you get it wrong, it goes back to a deck with shorter intervals.
So, you're kind of customizing it based on your own strengths and weaknesses?
Exactly.
Very cool. And this isn't just for like memorizing vocabulary words, right? This can be used for like grammar rules or idioms or even like pronunciation
Yeah,
patterns.
you can pretty much apply it to anything you're trying to learn.
Wow. Okay, that makes a lot of sense. Speaking of pronunciation, I'd love to kind of dig a little deeper into the benefits of shadowing. Is it really as effective as some people say it is?
Oh, I think it's one of the most powerful techniques out there, especially when it comes to developing, really natural sounding pronunciation. And there's actually more to it than just repeating words. There are different types of shadowing that you can experiment with.
Oh, really? Like what?
Well, you got pure shadowing where you're just repeating the speaker's words as closely as possible. And then there's echo shadowing where you leave a little pause after the speaker before you repeat. And then there's even prediction shadowing where you try to anticipate what the speaker's going to say next.
Wow, I had no idea there were so many variations. So, what's the advantage of trying out all these different types?
Each type kind of challenges your brain in a different way. Pure shadowing helps with mimicry, and that muscle memory, echo shadowing, gives you a little bit more time to process the sounds and focus on specific aspects of pronunciation. And then prediction shadowing, it really forces you to tune into the rhythm and the flow of the language.
So, it's not a one size fits all approach. It's really about finding what works for you.
Exactly. And one thing to keep in mind with shadowing is that it can be pretty challenging at first. It takes time and practice to develop the coordination and the focus you need to do it effectively.
I can imagine it feeling a bit overwhelming at times, especially if you're trying to keep up with a native speaker.
Yeah, definitely. And that's why it's really important to start slow. Choose short audio clips that have clear pronunciation and then gradually increase the difficulty as you get better. Don't worry about being perfect. The goal is to really train your ear and your mouth to work together, and that just takes time.
So, it's a process.
It is.
Okay, so shadowing, spaced repetition, those are some great techniques. What other resources would you recommend for someone who's really serious about taking their English fluency to the next level?
Well, podcasts are fantastic for a reason. They offer a wealth of authentic listening material on pretty much any topic you can imagine. You can also explore language learning apps, online courses, and even YouTube channels dedicated to English learning.
What about the classic advice of like watching movies and TV shows in English? Does that actually help?
It definitely can as long as you're actively engaged with the material. Don't just passively watch. Pay attention to the pronunciation, the idioms, the way people use language in different situations. You could even try turning on the subtitles in English to help you follow along.
Oh, that's a good tip. So it's really about making it fun and immersive, right?
Exactly. If you're not having fun, you're less likely to stick with it.
That's true. Okay, any other final words of wisdom?
Yeah, I'd say find ways to incorporate English into your daily life, even if it's just for a few minutes each day. Listen to a podcast while you're commuting, read an article online, or try writing in a journal in English. The more you surround yourself with the language, the faster you're going to progress.
So it's about making it a part of your routine.
Exactly. And as you continue on this language learning journey, just remember there's no right way to do it. Experiment with different techniques, find what resonates with you, and most importantly, don't be afraid to make mistakes.
Mistakes are part of the process.
Exactly. Every time you make a mistake, it's an opportunity for learning and growth.
This has been so insightful. I feel like I've already learned so much about active listening and shadowing and spaced repetition, but I'm really curious to hear more about the connection between listening and speaking that you talked about earlier. I think we need to dive a little deeper into that. Okay, so let's talk more about this connection between listening comprehension and speaking fluency. I have to admit, when I first saw that in the source material, I was a little confused. Like, how exactly does being a good listener make you a better speaker?
Yeah, it does seem a little counterintuitive at first, but think about it this way. How can you accurately reproduce the sounds, the rhythms, the intonation of a language if you haven't really trained your ear to recognize those things first?
So it's all about building that foundation.
Exactly. You need that solid base of listening comprehension before you can really start building up those speaking skills.
That makes sense.
And the more you expose yourself to authentic English, the more your brain starts to pick up on those little nuances, the subtle differences in pronunciation stress patterns, even the way that words are connected in natural speech.
It's like your brain is creating this library of sound and patterns that it can pull from when you're speaking.
Exactly. And the cool thing is it all happens pretty naturally. The more you listen, the more you absorb, even if you're not sitting there, consciously trying to analyze every single word.
So you're saying that just immersing yourself in the sounds of English can actually make a big difference in your fluency.
Absolutely. And that's where, podcasts, movies, TV shows, even music can be so helpful. They provide that constant stream of authentic input that your brain needs.
So it's not just about cracking open a textbook and drilling vocab, it's about surrounding yourself with the language in a way that feels fun and engaging.
Right? When you find material that you actually enjoy, listening to the learning process becomes almost effortless.
You know what I'm realizing now is that I probably haven't been focusing enough on listening. I've always been so fixated on speaking practice.
And remember, listening isn't just about passively hearing the words, it's about actively engaging with what you're hearing. So try summarizing what you've listened to in your own words, maybe make some predictions about what the speaker's going to say next, or even do some shadowing.
So find ways to make it interactive.
Exactly. The more you activate your brain while you're listening, the more you'll get out of it.
This deep dive has been amazing. I've learned so much about active listening and shadowing and spaced repetition. But I think the biggest takeaway for me is this idea that listening is truly the key to unlocking fluency, really sounding more natural when you speak English.
And remember, this is really just the beginning of your language learning journey. There are so many other techniques and resources out there for you to explore. The most important thing is to find what works best for you. Stay curious and don't be afraid to experiment.
Such great advice. Well, a huge thank you to our expert for sharing all of these amazing insights and for helping us break down this material. And to all of you listening out there, we hope this deep dive has given you some new tools and some inspiration to boost your English fluency. Remember, the journey to mastery is a marathon, not a sprint. So be patient with yourself, celebrate those little victories, and most importantly, have fun along the way.